The first thing the dog found was the shoe. It lay half buried beneath a tangle of wet leaves and pine needles. Its pale leather dulled by rot, its laces threaded through with mud-like veins. The dog, an aging German shepherd named Rook, froze, nostrils flaring, hackles lifting as if the forest itself had whispered something only he could hear. Deputy Aaron Pike followed the leash, his boots sinking into the loam, breath fogging in the early morning cold. He'd walked this trail 100 times before. Hunters used it. Teenagers sometimes partied here. Families hiked it in autumn when the trees bled gold and red. But shoes didn't belong here, not like this. Pike crouched, careful not to touch it. The smell hit him next, not strong, not obvious, but wrong. Sweet and sour, like damp paper left too long in the dark. His stomach tightened. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the undergrowth. "I need you to notify the sheriff." Possible 1016. A pause crackled back. "You have a body, Aaron?" "I don't know yet," Pike said. He looked deeper into the woods, where the trees crowded closer together, their branches knitting the light into shadows. "But something's waiting for us out here." The woods did not answer. They never did. By the time the crime scene tape went up, the fog had lifted enough to reveal the scale of what they were dealing with. The woman lay 30 yards off the trail, partially concealed beneath a fallen cedar. Her body was positioned on its side, her knees drawn slightly inward, as if she had curled up to sleep. Her face was turned away, hidden by hair stiffened with rain and dirt. What skin was visible had taken on a grayish cast that did not belong to the living. There was no blood. No obvious wounds, just a profound stillness. Sheriff Linda Morales stood at the edge of the clearing, hands on her hips, her jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped along her cheek. She had been sheriff of Black Hollow County for 6 years. In that time, she'd seen overdoses, domestic violence, the occasional hunting accident. But a body in the woods was different. It changed the air, hung heavy with unspoken questions. "How long?" she asked, her voice low. Dr. Evan Cross, the county medical examiner, adjusted his glasses, his face grim. "Hard to say out here. Exposure complicates things. But I'd estimate she's been dead at least a week. Possibly longer." Morales closed her eyes for a brief moment. A week meant that hope had already died somewhere, quietly behind a closed door. "ID?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Cross shook his head. No wallet, no phone. Jewelry's gone, if she had any. Her clothing is generic. Jeans, a sweater, a jacket. No visible tattoos from what I can see. So a dump site? Morales pressed. "Maybe," Cross said, not committing. "Or she came here on her own." Morales didn't like either answer. Behind them, a small cluster of deputies stood whispering among themselves. Word had already started to spread. In a county this small, secrets traveled faster than sirens. If you're listening to this story right now, if you're drawn to the unanswered questions, the quiet dread of places like this, you know, this is the moment where real investigations begin and where the truth often slips through the cracks. Stories like these don't end when the tape goes up. They unravel slowly, painfully. If you want to follow cases like this from the first discovery to the last haunting question, make sure you're subscribed because this is only the beginning. The woods were officially closed by noon. Local news vans lined the gravel road at the park entrance, their satellite dishes rising like metallic weeds from the shoulder. Reporters speculated into cameras, their faces serious, careful not to say too much while still saying everything. Phrases like unidentified woman, suspicious circumstances, and authorities tight-lipped filled the airwaves, fueling the community's growing fear. Inside the sheriff's office, Morales gathered her small team. The air was thick with tension and the smell of burnt coffee. "We're treating this as a homicide until proven otherwise," she said, pointing to a whiteboard where a crude map of the park had been sketched. "I want canvassing done within a 5-mile radius. Check every missing persons report, local, state, and all neighboring counties. Anyone who saw or heard anything, no matter how small, I want it logged. No assumptions." Detective Mark Holloway leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. In his late 40s, divorced and perpetually tired, he transferred from a larger city years ago, hoping for quieter work. He should have known better. Trouble found its way everywhere. The media's already pushing the serial killer angle, he said, his voice flat. People are scared. They can be scared later, Morales replied sharply. Right now we need facts. Not speculation. What they didn't say aloud was what everyone was thinking. Women didn't just die in the woods around here. Something had come to Black Hollow County. Something dark and predatory. The missing persons list arrived in waves. At first, it was the usual backlog runaways who'd likely return. Estranged adults who didn't want to be found, cases that were already months or even years old. None of them matched the estimated age range or physical description of the woman in the woods. Frustration mounted with every dead end. Then, late that afternoon, a call came through to the front desk. The deputy who took it motioned to Morales, his expression urgent. On the other end of the line was a woman named Carol Whitman. Her voice trembled, thick with a fear that was all too familiar to the people in that room. My sister hasn't been answering her phone, Carol said, her words tumbling out in a rush. She goes hiking sometimes, alone. I told her not to. I told her it wasn't safe. What's your sister's name? The deputy asked calmly, trying to keep her grounded. Rachel, Carol managed to say. Rachel Whitman. She lives in Pine Ridge. She drives a blue Honda Civic. Morales listened from across the room, her pen tapping a nervous rhythm against her notepad. And when was the last time you saw her? The deputy asked. A pause, then a choked sob. 8 days ago, Carol said. She said she needed to clear her head. She just wanted to go for a walk. 8 days. The number hung in the air. Morales met Holloway's eyes from across the room. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. This was it. This was their first real lead. Bring her in, Morales said, her voice barely a whisper, but firm with resolve. Now, the first piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place, and the picture it was starting to form was more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. Rachel Whitman was 34 years old. She worked from home as a data analyst for a healthcare firm. She had no criminal record, no known enemies. According to her sister Carol, Rachel had been struggling. Not in a dramatic way, but with the slow, quiet erosion of a life that just hadn't turned out the way she'd hoped. She used to be so solid, Carol told detectives, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water she hadn't touched. After the divorce, something changed. She said she felt invisible. Detective Holloway watched her carefully. Grief wore many masks, and shock was often the most convincing. Did Rachel ever mention anyone bothering her? He asked. Anyone following her? Carol shook her head. No, she liked being alone. Said it was the only place she could breathe. Did she have plans to meet anyone? His partner, Detective Morales, asked. No, Carol replied, the silence that followed feeling heavy and suffocating. A few moments later, Morales spoke again, her voice gentle. We need you to come with us, she said. There's something we need you to see. The color drained from Carol's face. The identification wasn't official, but it was undeniable. When Carol saw the shoe, she collapsed into a chair, sobbing. That's hers, she whispered. She bought them last fall. She said they were ugly, but comfortable. A hardness settled in Morales' chest. They still needed to wait for dental confirmation, for fingerprints, all the formalities, but everyone in that room knew. Rachel Whitman was the woman they found in the woods. And someone somewhere knew exactly how she ended up there. The autopsy was conducted the next morning. Dr. Cross was methodical, narrating his findings into a recorder as he examined Rachel's body. No defensive wounds, he said. No fractures. No blunt force trauma. Holloway, observing, asked, so she wasn't attacked? Not necessarily, Cross replied without looking up. Sometimes the most effective methods leave the least evidence. He paused, leaning in to examine the neck more closely. There's petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, he said slowly. It's subtle, but it's present. Morose leaned forward. Meaning? Possible asphyxiation, Cross stated. Manual strangulation or with a ligature. Whatever was used, it didn't leave a clear mark. The room suddenly felt colder. Cause of death? Morales asked. Cross let out a long breath. I'll need toxicology to be sure. But if I had to guess, oxygen deprivation. Someone had taken the very air from Rachel's lungs. And then they had carefully placed her in the woods. The town reacted the way small towns always do, first quietly and then all at once. People started locking their doors. Joggers abandoned the trails. Parents began walking their children to their bus stops, and the rumors bloomed like mold in the dark. She was having an affair. She owed someone money. She was meeting a man out there. Online forums exploded with speculation. Armchair sleuths dissected Rachel's life from a distance, reducing a complex living person to pixels and theories. Morales hated that part the most. Rachel Whitman was becoming a story. And stories have a nasty habit of swallowing the truth whole. The first real lead came from a place they almost didn't look. 2 days later, Rachel's phone was found, tossed into a shallow creek about a mile from where her body was discovered. It was waterlogged but not completely destroyed. The department's tech wizards managed to recover fragments, a few texts, some location pings, a partial call log. One message stood out. It was sent the night she disappeared. "I'll be there soon. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Holloway stared at the screen. "That doesn't sound like someone going for a peaceful hike," he said, breaking the silence. Morales nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the words. "No," she said. "It sounds like an ending." And somewhere between that chilling message and the silent woods, Rachel Whitman had crossed a line she could never come back from. That night, Morales stayed late in her office, long after everyone else had gone home. She pulled up the map again, tracing routes with her finger. The park, the creek where the phone was found. Rachel's home. She was looking at the spaces between the points, the gaps in the timeline. Cases like this didn't explode. They seeped into everything, slowly revealing their shape. She thought about the way Rachel's body had been positioned. It wasn't dumped, not just discarded. It was placed, almost carefully, as if the person who did this wanted her to be found, or perhaps wanted her to be remembered in a specific way. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, whispering against the windows of the station, sounding like distant, hurried footsteps. And for the first time since the initial call came in, Sheriff Linda Morales allowed herself to think the one thought she had been pushing away all day. What if this wasn't the first time? And more terrifyingly, what if it wouldn't be the last? The first suspect was the obvious one. He always was. Ethan Whitman arrived at the sheriff's office just after sunrise, wearing the same jacket he'd worn in the wedding photos that still floated around social media like ghosts. He looked older than his 40 years, his face drawn tight as if sleep had become an enemy. Rachel's ex-husband. They had been divorced for 2 years. No children, no restraining orders, no documented violence. Just a quiet unraveling that friends described with words like sad and inevitable that never meant safe. Detective Holloway led him into interview room B. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, unforgiving and flat. Ethan sat stiffly, his hands folded on the scuffed table, eyes fixed on nothing. "Do you know why you're here?" Holloway asked. Ethan nodded slowly. "Because my wife is dead." "Ex-wife," Holloway corrected, his tone gentle. Ethan swallowed hard. "Because Rachel is dead." From behind the one-way glass, Detective Morales watched, arms crossed. She'd learned early in her career that grief could look just like guilt, and guilt could masquerade as heartbreak. You had to let the facts do the talking. "When was the last time you saw Rachel?" Holloway continued. Ethan hesitated just long enough for it to register as a pause. 3 weeks ago, he said. "We met for coffee." "What did you talk about?" "She wanted closure," he replied, his voice thin. "She always wanted closure." Holloway leaned forward, his chair scraping against the floor. "Did you argue?" Ethan shook his head, a little too quickly. "No, not really. She said she was thinking about leaving town." "Starting over?" Morales felt a flicker of irritation. That detail was new. It hadn't come up in any of the initial witness interviews. "Did she say where?" Holloway pressed. "No. Did you speak to her after that?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She texted me." Holloway slid a printed screenshot across the table. The words were stark against the white paper. Asterisk, "I'll be there soon. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Asterisk. Ethan stared at it, as if seeing it for the very first time. "That's not..." He stopped, taking a shaky breath. That's not what it sounds like. What does it sound like to you, Ethan? Holloway asked quietly. It sounds like a confrontation, Ethan admitted. But she was just talking about dropping off some boxes. Old stuff she still had at her place. Meares' voice crackled through the intercom, sharp and clear. Where was she supposed to drop them off? Ethan flinched. My place, he said. But she never came. Did you expect her? Morales asked. Yes, he said. I waited. How long? An hour, maybe more. Did you call her when she didn't show up? No, he said quickly. Then much quieter, I didn't want to push. Morales scribbled a note on her pad. Holloway shifted gears. And the woods? The trails up by the reservoir? Did Rachel ever go hiking with you? No, Ethan said firmly. She liked to go alone. They let the silence stretch out, filling the small room. Finally, Morales stepped inside. Ethan, she said, her voice calm and even, we need to know exactly where you were the night Rachel disappeared. He met her eyes, a flicker of something unreadable in his own. At home, he said. Alone. It was the kind of alibi that was almost impossible to prove, and even harder to break. But they tried. Alibis were checked. Phone records were pulled. Surveillance footage from the apartment complex was reviewed. And surprisingly, Ethan Whitman's story held up. His phone pinged off the local tower, placing him squarely at his apartment all night. No gaps, no suspicious movements. His neighbors confirmed his car never left its designated parking spot. By the end of the day, the obvious suspect was fading from view. But that text message remained hanging in the air like an unanswered question. Asterisk, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Asterisk, harder for whom? The toxicology report arrived 48 hours later, bringing with it a new layer of confusion. No alcohol. No illegal drugs. But there was something else. Trace amounts of zolpidem, Ambien. The medical examiner, Dr. Cross, pointed to the chart. It's not a lethal dose, he explained, but it would be enough to impair judgment. Cause significant drowsiness, maybe even confusion. So someone drugged her? Holloway asked, leaning over the report. Possibly, Cross replied, hedging his bets. Or she took it herself. Did she have a prescription for it? Morales asked. No record of one, Cross confirmed. But it's a commonly shared medication. People pass it around. Morales frowned. This changed things. Rachel Whitman had been sedated. That meant she likely hadn't walked into those woods fully alert. Which meant someone might have helped her get there, or led her. The investigation turned inward, toward Rachel's life. They began to dig the way investigators always do, methodically, mercilessly. They combed through emails, bank statements, social media accounts, and browser search histories. At first, everything seemed painfully mundane. Work deadlines for her graphic design job, online grocery orders, saved articles about mindfulness and starting over after a divorce. It painted a picture of a woman trying to piece her life back together. Then Holloway found it. A private online group, invitation only. The name was innocuous enough. Second Path. On the surface, it looked like a standard self-help community. People were discussing life transitions, reinvention, and letting go of their past lives to forge a new future. But the deeper Holloway went, scrolling through pages of posts, the stranger it became. The language shifted. Members wrote about disappearing without disappearing. They discussed choosing the place where your old self ends. There were frequent mentions of trusting the guide, and Rachel had been an active member. Very active. Morales leaned over his shoulder, reading the screen in silence. How in the world did she find this place? She asked, her voice low. It's hard to say, Holloway replied, clicking through the forum's architecture. It's not indexed by any search engines. You have to be invited by an existing member. Who invited her? Holloway navigated to Rachel's profile and her private messages. There's a username she interacted with a lot, he said, pointing at the screen. North Star. Any personal info attached to the account? IP address? Anything? None, Holloway said, frustration creeping into his voice. Completely anonymous. But they messaged privately. A lot. He opened the message thread. Rachel's words stared back at them, raw and vulnerable. I'm tired of being seen as a failure, as the woman whose marriage fell apart. I don't know who I am anymore. I just wanted to stop hurting. North Star's replies were calm, measured, and deeply unsettling. Pain ends when resistance ends. There are places where you can finally rest, where the person you used to be can be left behind. You don't have to be afraid. I can show you the way. Morales felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't a support group. This isn't self-help, she said, her voice barely a whisper. This is grooming. The case had just taken a dark and twisted turn, leading them away from a scorned ex-husband and into the shadowy corners of the internet, where a faceless guide promised peace at an impossible price. The warrant came through faster than anyone expected. In the sterile glow of computer screens, tech specialists began the painstaking work of unraveling a digital ghost. They traced IP addresses, bouncing them through servers across the globe, peeling back layer after meticulous layer of digital camouflage. It quickly became apparent that North Star wasn't a single person. It was a complex network of several accounts, all cleverly routed through the same anonymizing service. This wasn't some random troll. Someone had built this fortress of anonymity, carefully, intentionally. The local PD reached out to federal cybercrime units, but the wheels of bureaucracy turned slowly. Responses were sluggish, jurisdiction lines became blurred, and resources were already stretched thin across countless other cases. While the police were hitting digital dead ends, the story broke. The media, sniffing out a sensational angle, caught wind of the forum. Headlines exploded across news sites and television screens. Secret online group linked to Wood's death. And then, the one that made Detective Morales' stomach turn. Did Rachel Whitman fall into a cult? She watched the evening news report from her cluttered office, her jaw tightening with every word. Cult was a dangerous, loaded term. It attracted a frenzy of attention, yes, but it also warped facts into a narrative that was easy to digest but hard to correct. Once people think they understand, they stop listening. The nuance, the truth, gets lost in the noise. But amidst the media chaos, one chilling fact was becoming crystal clear. When Rachel Whitman walked into those woods, she hadn't been alone. The first real break in the case came from an overlooked, seemingly insignificant detail. Rachel's car. It had been found parked at the trailhead, untouched, the day after she disappeared. It was processed, but nothing of note was found. But Morales, driven by a gut feeling, sent the forensics team back. Go over it again, she'd said. Slower this time. Assume you missed something. And they had. Tucked into the floor mat on the passenger side was a single fiber. Dark blue, synthetic. Lab analysis confirmed it wasn't from any of Rachel's clothing. The report noted it matched a type commonly used in tactical gloves. Hunters wear them, a young deputy suggested during the briefing. So do cops. Sergeant Holloway shot back, his eyes scanning the room. Narrows stared at the tiny fiber sealed in the evidence bag. Or, she thought, it could be worn by anyone who didn't want to leave fingerprints. With this new lead, they began to reconstruct Rachel's last day with renewed focus. Every minute mattered. Her front door camera showed her leaving her house at exactly 6:42 p.m. She drove to a nearby pharmacy. A quick stop. Security footage showed her buying nothing but a bottle of water and a tube of lip balm. At 7:18 p.m., her phone pinged a cell tower near the park entrance. At 7:31 p.m., she sent that final cryptic message to the North Star forum. And then, just 5 minutes later, at 7:36 p.m., her phone went dark. Powered off. The timeline was tight, unforgiving. It left little room for chance encounters. Someone met her there. Someone she knew, or at least someone she trusted enough not to run from. The team fanned out, re-interviewing every possible witness. Hikers, joggers, park employees who might have been finishing their shifts. Most remembered nothing out of the ordinary. A car here, a distant figure there. Nothing solid. Until a college student named Leah Mendoza came forward. She'd seen the news, and a detail clicked. I saw her, Leah said, her hands twisting nervously in her lap as she sat in the sterile interview room. I didn't think it mattered at the time. Detective Morales leaned forward, her voice gentle, coaxing. Tell us everything, Leah. It all matters. Leah took a deep breath. She was talking to a man, she said. Right there, near the trailhead by that big oak tree. Morales felt a jolt. Can you describe him? He was tall, older than her, maybe in his 40s or 50s. He had this really calm voice, like a therapist, you know. Did you hear what they were talking about? Morales asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice. Leah shook her head. No, I was too far away, but I remember how she looked. She looked relieved, like she'd finally found someone who understood what she was going through. Morales closed her eyes for a brief moment, the image searing into her mind. A guide, not a monster dragging her into the dark, but a guide leading her toward what she thought was the light. Based on Leah's description, a composite sketch was created and released to the public. The tip line lit up immediately. Calls flooded in, most of them well-meaning but useless dead ends. People saw the sketch in every stranger, every neighbor. But one tip stood out. It led them to a man named Thomas Keene. The name meant nothing at first, but his profile was unsettling. He was a former crisis counselor. He had lost his license several years ago following allegations of serious boundary violations with his clients. Nothing that rose to the level of a criminal charge, but deeply concerning for someone in his profession. Now he worked as a freelance life coach, running workshops on concepts like radical acceptance, and he lived just 20 minutes from Black Hollow Forest Park. The real shock came when they pulled his digital records. Morales felt her stomach drop as she read the report. Keene had been an active member of the Second Path Forum. He wasn't North Star, but he was there, lurking under several different usernames, participating in discussions, offering guidance. The pieces were locking into place with terrifying speed. The warrant was executed at dawn the next day. Keene's house was a modest suburban home, quiet on the outside. Too quiet. Inside there was no sign of a struggle, no immediate evidence of a crime. It was orderly neat. The walls were lined with books on philosophy, psychology, spirituality. Journals filled with meticulous, looping handwriting covered a large desk, and then they found it. On the wall of his study, pinned with surgical precision, was a map, a detailed topographical map of Black Hollow Forest. Several locations were circled in red ink. The place where Rachel's body was found was only one of them. Morales stared at the map, a cold dread pooling in her chest. Rachel Whitman wasn't the beginning of this story. She was just a point on a much longer, darker path. And the woods were holding more secrets. Outside, a media circus was already forming as Thomas Keene was escorted from his home and into a waiting police car. His face was a mask unreadable, calm. He did not resist. He did not speak a single word. As the car door closed behind him, Morales felt no sense of victory, no relief. Only the heavy, sinking certainty that the story they were just beginning to uncover was far darker and infinitely more complicated than anyone could have possibly imagined. And somewhere in that terrifying space between trust and surrender, Rachel Whitman had willingly stepped into the trees, believing she was finally safe. Thank you so much for watching. This case is a powerful reminder of how vulnerability can be exploited in the most unexpected ways. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into complex cases. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. Stay safe out there. Subscribe for more updates on this developing story.